Jon and Sansa reunite, Littlefinger returns, and Daenerys sets fire to things again. But what does it all mean? And what did we miss when we watched it first time around? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. Particularly if you're a first time viewer, please do consider subscribing if you enjoy the video. This is an explanation of Season 6, Episode 4 of Game of Thrones, The Book of the Stranger, in the light of all we now know. I'll pick out all the areas of foreshadowing and hints of what is to come, as well as explaining what was really going on at the time. Obviously, if you haven't caught up to the end of Season 6, then be wary of spoilers. In King's Landing, the High Sparrow continues his political manoeuvrings. Last week it was Tommen in his sights. This time it is Margaery. But there are a lot of games going on here. Margaery has clearly understood that the best way to escape is actually to go along with the High Sparrow, memorizing sections of scripture to say back to him. Her reward is being allowed to see Loras, her brother, who has been imprisoned longer and seems to be less strong-minded than Margaery. She encourages him, and it's clear that she has no intention of leaving without him. Meanwhile, Cersei, still under the threat of a trial, has a plan. She spent the last 3 weeks being rather ineffective against the wiles of the High Sparrow and the wit of Olenna Tyrell, so this time she resorts to her default position, to go on the attack. She wants to march an army up to the Great Sept to force the High Sparrow to hand over Margaery. It can't be the Lannister army, as Tommen has expressly forbid their use in King's Landing, so she wants to use the Tyrell army. If the plan works, Margaery will be free, the High Sparrow will have been forced into an embarrassing climb down, and Cersei will be seen to be the power in King's Landing once more. Kevan and Olenna reluctantly agree. The latter only once she hears that the High Sparrow is planning to make Margaery do a walk of shame like Cersei did in Season 5. Her love for her grandchildren once more showing through. Of course, the only reason that Cersei knows about the High Sparrow's plans is because Tommen told her. And the only reason Tommen knows is because the High Sparrow told him, knowing that it would get back to Cersei. Cersei thinks she has backed the High Sparrow into a corner, but again he is outmaneuvering her. And we'll see how that plays out in the next episode. At Winterfell, Ramsay calls Osha to him. He knows, and she knows, that Rickon is clearly of value to him as a prisoner, but she isn't. She tries to get close enough to kill him, but Ramsay kills her instead. This is a rather unnecessary death, and is Ramsay all over. Incidentally, George R.R. Martin has said that he particularly liked how the character of Osha came across on the show, and he was considering rewriting her role a little in future books to reflect that. So it remains to be seen if this is her fate in the books as well as the show. It may not be. The other thing that Ramsay does off-screen in this episode is write a letter to Jon, which we'll pick up on in just a moment. Because Sansa, Brienne and Pod arrive at Castle Black, and there is a genuinely touching reunion between Sansa and Jon. They may not have been close as children, but they have each been through so much over the last few years that this is the first moment for either of them to reconnect to that place of family and safety. It's also a sign, I think, that the story has reached the point at which characters who have spread out across the land return to their roots. There will be many more reunions like this over the next couple of seasons, as the Starks return to Winterfell, old friends and enemies reconnect, scores are settled, relationships rekindled, and so on. In fact, just later in this very episode we see another set of reunions. Davos confronts Melisandre about what happened to Stannis and Shireen. But before she can fully respond, Brienne, who's seen neither of them since Season 2, breaks in to say that she killed Stannis for his part in the murder of Renly, and that she still holds Melisandre responsible for the same crime. Back to Jon and Sansa, it's very obvious that they are in completely different places right now. Sansa is feeling newly empowered, having escaped Ramsay, left Littlefinger behind, made her peace with Theon, and got herself a devoted and very impressive sworn knight in Brienne. For the first time since she left Winterfell as a child, she is feeling safe and free. She wants to retake her home from the man who abused her so badly. Jon, however, is weary. He is weary of battle, and he is weary of life. It is into this disagreement that Ramsay sends his letter. It is addressed to Jon, and it is openly taunting, threatening to feed Rickon to the dogs, among many other things. It is clearly aiming to provoke Jon into attacking Winterfell. And Sansa wins the argument. The Starks may currently be outnumbered, but they will rally the North behind the Stark banner and march on Winterfell. This letter is also in the books, incidentally, and is the cause of much conjecture. It is known as the Pink Letter, on account of its pink sealing wax, and it arrives just before Jon is killed. The controversy around this version of the letter is whether it really is from Ramsay. It doesn't read like one of his letters, and there are several people who might have an interest in having Jon and the wildlings march on Winterfell. But there is no controversy in the show. The letter is surely from Ramsay, and it has its desired effect. An outnumbered army with an unmotivated leader has been goaded into battle. In the Vale, we have our first sight of Littlefinger this season, and he is already up to his old tricks, lying to Jon Royce about how Sansa ended up being married to Ramsay. It's clear that the Lords of the Vale do not trust Littlefinger. But this matters little, because he has Robin Arryn wrapped around his finger and gets him to commit the Knights of the Vale to support Sansa, his cousin. As always, we are unsure of Littlefinger's true motivations at this point. Just before this, last season, he was in King's Landing and got a decree from King Tommen via Cersei that he would be declared Warden of the North if he used the Knights of the Vale to retake Winterfell for the Lannisters. This is probably the next step in his plan, to marry Sansa and become Warden of the North with the backing of both the Starks and the Lannisters. But his lies are starting to mount up, and sooner or later, and probably sooner, they will catch up with him. Theon arrives back in the Iron Islands to hear of his father's death. Although Yara initially thinks he must have returned to make a play for the Salt Throne, he hasn't. His sense of entitlement to that has vanished. He realizes that Yara is by far the better candidate, and he offers her his wholehearted support. We'll see how the Kingsmoot itself pans out next episode. In Meereen, we see Tyrion's diplomacy in full force. The wise masters of Yunkai, Astapor and Volantis arrive, and Tyrion presents an offer to them. Phase out slavery over 7 years, stop funding the Sons of the Harpy, and all enmity will be forgotten. The wise masters seem unconvinced, and the former slaves of Meereen, including Grey Worm and Missandei, even more so. The wise masters cannot be trusted, they say, and even if they could, the principle has to remain that slavery should be abolished now, not in 7 years' time. Tyrion wins the argument, but the ethical question remains. Tyrion is doing what he thinks is right, and Missandei and Grey Worm are saying what they think is right, and it's hard to disagree with either point of view. But one thing is indisputable. Tyrion has bought himself some time. War was brewing, and although the city is being brought back into control, this will not happen overnight. These are the hard decisions of government, and there are no easy answers. Finally, we reach Face Dothrak. Jorah and Daario have finally caught up with Dany. There's a bit of banter between them, a bit of macho one-upmanship, but when they finally find her, they are both very much put in their place. They have come riding to Daenerys' rescue like knights of old, but she doesn't need them. Their plan is highly unlikely to succeed, she says, and besides, she has a better one. All in all, this is another fantasy trope turned on its head. When it's time for the Khals to decide on Dany's fate, we see her plan play out. And we shouldn't really be surprised that it involves violence, and fire, and death. These seem to be Dany's default solutions to everything. The Khals debate what to do with her, and she simply pronounces judgment on them, saying that none of them are fit to lead the Dothraki. Only she is. And to underline her point, she knocks over the braziers in the wooden hut, burning them all to a crisp before emerging unharmed from the flames herself. One wonders if there is anything the Khals could have said or done that would have persuaded her not to kill them all, and the two apparently innocent guards outside the hut. I suspect not. This seems to have been her plan since she got here, to kill the Khals and take control of the Khalasar. When Dany steps outside, the Dothraki kneel before her in a deliberate echoing of the end of Season 1, when she emerged from the ashes of Khal Drogo's funeral pyre with her dragons hatched. This time, she emerges from the fire to take control of a whole army. In the books, this is also a significant moment in relation to Dany's visions in the House of the Undying. One of these was of a line of crones bowing before her at Vaes Dothrak, which seems to be pretty much what happened here. Also, there is the prophecy that she has 3 fires to light, which sounds very vague until you realise that she rarely actually lights fires herself. She leaves that to her dragons. But she did light Khal Drogo's funeral pyre, and she did light this fire, so that's 2. I have a theory about the 3rd that I've set out in another video. This episode is called The Book of the Stranger, which is a reference to the piece of Faith of the Seven Scripture that Marjorie and the High Sparrow discuss. But the episode is about reunions. Sansa and Jon, Yara and Theon, Tyrion and his former slave master, and so on, where one or both parties has changed beyond recognition since they last saw each other, to the point where they are virtual strangers. With Sansa and Jon, the changes are obvious. Theon's arrival at Pike is a deliberate echoing of his arrival in Season 2, but he is a very, very different man today. And Tyrion's former slave master is keen to point out what a meteoric rise Tyrion has had over the last year. George R.R. Martin's world is a world of change. When the story finally draws to a close, everything will be different. The people, the power, and even the Game of Thrones itself. What do you think? Do you have any questions or unresolved issues about this episode? What struck you as important? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to know when my next video comes out, then please click on the subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me in producing more videos like this, as well as getting access to more of my content, please click through to my Patreon page. I really do appreciate it. Thanks for watching. That's all for this time. I'll see you again soon.